The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, Concordant Body, Appendant Body, Masonic Authority, or CraftsmanOnline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York.
Hey, welcome back. It's Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce, and you've joined us for an episode on Masonic research. This is actually the first of a 2-part episode series on the topic. Why do we have to go big? Because we have 2 of the biggest names in Masonic research and writing, brothers Kendall and Chris Ruli, both previous guests on the Craftsman Online podcast, friends to the program, and they're going to be talking a little bit about some of the societies and groups that they write for, best practices on if you're looking to maybe get an article, whether it be a blog article, a lecture, or a presentation for your lodge, and how we can all as Masons contribute to responsible Masonic research. But first, Adam and Chris, it's good to have you back on the Craftsman Online podcast.
I'm ready to go. I'm excited. It's good to see you. It's good to see Adam. I talk to Adam once a week at least. Sometimes when we're really, well, we'll talk about it more, but excited to see him in person.
Absolutely. It's not often that we all get to see each other. We hear each other's voices all the time. Usually I'm in the car, he's at work or at home or wherever. I can call from driving, and that's where I spend, a good half hour of my life getting to work. So
I hear both of you in the car or my headset when I'm running or driving to work, as well as guests on the podcast. And independently, you're both brothers who are well known within the Masonic research community. One of you is a member of 2 of the big 3. The other is a member of all 3 of the big 3. I only know about the Allied Masonic degrees and the Southern California Lodge of Research with the Fraternal Review. So let's kind of just level set there. When it comes to Masonic research, where does it fit in, and what opportunities are there for brothers that want to pursue this?
there are several different research organizations, and they've been very popular for a very long time. But what you termed as the big 3 is the 3 most well-known. One of them is the oldest, and that is the Quater Coronati Lodge of Research, number 2076 in London. They have the Quater Coronati Correspondence Circle, which is a subscriber-based society, which the majority of people will belong to. And then there is the actual lodge, which has a different set of criteria for membership. But with the Quater Coronati Correspondence Circle, that's been in existence ever since the lodge, pretty much since the 1880s. And that allows subscribers to come to the meetings, participate, and also receive the annual transactions, which is AQC. That's the easiest way to say it, which is the full name is Ars Quatuor Coronatorum. And then the second one, which is the second oldest, is the Philalethes Society. And that is the oldest independent research society. And that has been going on since the late 1920s. Then there is the Scottish Rite Research Society. And that is the youngest, having been begun in 1991 and publishing its first volume of Herodom in 1992. So these are the big 3 that have distinguished themselves. But what you'll see are contributors that go across lines. They contribute to all 3 of these, plus the other ones, ones that are just as famous, such as the Texas Lodge of Research, and then the Southern California Research Lodge, which also publishes the Fraternal Review. And they all have their own sort of focus. Of course, you have AMD and other invitational groups that do have an emphasis on Masonic study, on Masonic research.
When you mentioned the AMD, I believe just for the sake of clarity, we're talking about the Miscellanea, which is the publication of the Allied Masonic degrees. And just like Adam said, they vary in terms of the types of papers you would get, the level of scholarship, the rigor as part of that scholarship. Certain brothers like to maybe orient themselves towards certain publications, while others tend to, focus on, maybe submitting to lodges of research within a state, or, these sort of different other bodies. So I agree with Adam completely. It really is a patchwork of Masonic research across the country and across the globe.
It's a really strong point that you just made, because I'm thinking of all the things that we hear about in Blue Lodge, because that's where all of it, let's say, begins, right? You hear about the charitable groups that are available within Freemasonry, all of the leadership things that you could possibly be involved with, the community service, the other organizations just within our Blue Lodge, within our craft. Very rarely do you ever hear about, hey, there's research opportunities. And for brothers that are into this, these groups that you've talked about, they cover everything from history to the central figures, to central times and places, to ritual, to the esoteric, to way deep into the ancient mysteries. I like to kind of describe Masonic researchers as fellows, because there is that opportunity for you to earn that title, but fellows within the fraternity. So, as you kind of alluded to, Chris, like if we have a brother that's listening and it's like, hey, I'd like to start talking in lodge, or maybe there's this thing that I'm writing on or I'm researching upon, is approaching a research opportunity like Fight Club where you don't talk about it? Or are there like applications that you can go seek to learn more about these organizations?
You do not need to be a Mason to join these organizations. Non-Masons can join as subscribers to get the journals, to get the papers, to get the things, and they can read and learn about what's going on with research. The thing that I would start by saying is, or my introduction, if a brother, Michael, you asked, well, someone wants to start, where do they start? My thing is, give them the resources, take a look at those 3 or 4 websites, the websites for the Philalethes, for Scottish Rite Research Society, for the Correspondence Circle, to get access to the AQC. They're all freely available online. They are relatively cheap, let me say. Certainly, if you combine all 3 of the big 3, I think it's about $60 or $70. I'm not really sure, but I think it's a minimum of $60 across all 3. So $180 for all of those, and you would get a journal every year. You would get access to all those things. So, and as far as I know, you can actually pay to get a back catalog of some of these journals and and then we also republish. So, for example, the Plumb Line, which is the newsletter of the Scottish Rite Research Society, they published a large book that basically encompasses the first, I think, 15 or so years. And so you can get access to those back documents. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is, number one, you do not have to be a Mason in order to join these organizations. Number two, even if you are a Mason, there's no jurisdictional issue. You can apply for membership and you basically become a subscriber. You get access to all these things. Number three, you also don't need to be a member of the organization to submit papers. So even if you are interested, you have this really great or interesting research idea, you've developed a really good paper and you want to submit it to us, but you are allowed, obviously, to submit the paper without being a member of any of these 3 organizations. We will certainly take a look at it, depending on where you send it. I'm sure Adam and I will be happy to review any papers that you're willing to, or you're interested in submitting. And then if it's not appropriate for our journal or for one of these journals, we can certainly share it with the network of other editors to make sure that it gets published somewhere else.
Just don't send your paper to all of them at one time.
Right. That's right.
Please, I cannot emphasize how much that should not happen. And why, you may ask, is that when a publication decides to publish your paper, they gain certain rights of publishing. I'd like to think that the ones that I have direct control over editing, that would be the Scottish Rite Research Society, that we are happy to take papers, of a variety of subjects. Again, it doesn't have to just be Scottish Rite, but we want it to be compelling. And often, if it's new information, we want to get it first. But of course, I wouldn't call it competition, but we are in league with the others. And so, again, if it's not necessarily our cup of tea, we can recommend it to the others. And you'll find that many of these organizations, they all have similar people contributing, and that allows us to make new friends. And a lot of us are professional researchers or professional historians, having that network. Chris has said this before on your podcast, and I'll repeat it, is that, and you've mentioned it too, Michael, is you gain a whole new, it's its own fraternity of friends and brothers. And we're able to help each other. If I'm working on a particular subject and I can reach out and see who can, if that one brother or individual brother or not doesn't have the information, they may have a resource as well.
So I'm going to take my time asking the next question so you have time to think, because you're going to hop back in your time machines on this one. But I want to picture yourself, because when Chris mentioned he started kind of his research journey 5 years ago. So I want you to think back to when you first started doing this to where you are now. And quite simply, what have you gained? And Adam, you were kind of setting some of the larger framework, like what you value now as being a member of some of these societies, some of these organizations. But what have you gained from being a member of these Masonic research groups then to now?
When I first started, I really started Masonic history or my work on one lodge. I was focusing on digitizing and getting my one home lodge up to where it should be, where you have digital records, where you have transcriptions, where we can easily access stuff. And if people reach out to me, I can quickly go through their membership catalog and figure out when a certain individual was raised. And so to me, I thought at a minimum, I need to cultivate the space where I was operating as a young Mason first and make sure that that was appropriate. And then over time, I started, and Michael, you know him, Jason Van Dyke, I started writing papers, things that I found very interesting for the District of Columbia's membership magazine that would come out every quarter or so. Over time, that grew into, hey, I want to write something about my lodge. It eventually got into the Grand Lodge. I started writing more. I started looking at the Grand Lodge library. And so basically, the only difference is the scope got wider. It got bigger. The topics started getting bigger. The topics started focusing on the White House and congressmen and Freemasonry, and it sort of just ballooned over time. And what I realized was, as I was getting to this larger scope, I needed to start looking at, well, what have other people been writing on? Or who has been writing on these topics? And so I got into the Philalethes. I got into the Scottish Rite Research Society because I was very concerned about getting access to primary resources. And so Adam and I, this is an issue we always deal with, which is dealing with citing and primary resources. And do you have the original text, or do you have reprints, or can you get access to these resources? So if you're a good researcher, you're always looking for those primary resources, access to those primary resources. Adam and I have had literally conversations where, he is excited because he found in a university, somewhere across the country, the papers of someone, X individual that he's working on a paper for. And it's exciting because we don't know where those things are. And so part of that research process is the excitement of discovery.
Some would say, well, we have the internet now and it's so easy. Yes, it's at your fingertips. But the methodology is very similar as you would in a library and an archive to acquire information, to be able to take an idea and to translate it into something that the computer understands, or where to go to find it. But also, nothing will ever replace your library. Don't let them die. And then that's my PSA.
The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation. September is when New York lodges and Masons return to our labors. So whether you're looking for a new apron, maybe for your officers or just as a visitor, a Masonic ring for yourself, a hoodie to stay warm at your kids' fall sports games, or a cool cotton t-shirt for the weekend, Again, Bricks Masons has you covered with your Masonic needs. Their products cover all of our Masonic bodies with unique items for your home, your car, and just about every type of Masonic thing you could ever imagine. If you can think it, Bricks Masons can work with you to create it and personalize it to make it your own. Visit bricksmasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order. We live in a really interesting time right now where I can't even count how many Masonic blogs or even other podcasts that are out there. We have a lot of brothers that, thanks to the communication world that we live in now, they want to get out there and share that light with lots of excitement. This runs into an issue. So I'd like to kind of get your definition on what the difference is between a blog for a website, an article, versus a research paper. If you want to get into like just the scope or some of the work that goes into it, maybe the discussion topics, how it's formatted, however you want to do it, just so that brothers that are listening going, well, I'm kind of writing right now for my lodge website, or as Brother Ruli said, hey, I want to write something for my, Grand Lodge newsletter that's going to be coming out. How do you take an idea like that and maybe scaffold it up to become a research paper if you've never written one before?
The research papers that Adam and I are talking about fit in a unique criteria. I think the stuff that is submitted to the Philalethes and AQC and Scottish Rite or wherever are topics that tended to be stuff that has not really been published before, tends to be newer information, newer insights, things that you don't necessarily get from a source that's already been published. In order to answer that question, Michael, you have to start and say, first, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to just educate and inform the audience with a little bit of information about a certain topic? Well, then that to me is more of a blog. If you are creating new research, if you have identified things that have not been published in Masonic periodicals or journals, you found it through research, accessing libraries or historical societies or, original documents that have not been published in any source, that to me tends to be more on the research side. That means you've reviewed the topic as best as you can. You've seen what others have written, and you're adding to that commentary. You're creating knowledge, or you're creating something new from things that never were new in the first place. So you're really effectively creating something new. And to me, that's what are the types of things that are produced in research journals that we're talking about, the big three. We're trying to identify new stuff in order to share it with a broad audience. Now, sometimes that doesn't necessarily have to be, look, this old manuscript that's never been published before, I'm going to publish it. Sometimes it's a new perspective. Sometimes it's criticism on something that has already been published. And that is the kind of material that I think we're looking more towards, because there are certain topics that has just been picked over. So, it's either, but your perspectives on a topic may not have been. I think that is something that we're looking for when you're talking about a research journal. If you're talking about a blog post, if you're talking about, here are 6 paragraphs on the history of Teddy Roosevelt, well, you don't necessarily need to submit that to a research journal, because that topic's been picked over. But if you write it in a blog and you share it with others, I think there's certainly value there.
And that highlights the difference between publishing for a journal, or even a book for that matter, a monograph, or a blog, or a presentation. And you have to ask yourself, would this be better as a blog, or better as a lecture for my brothers at a lodge? Or is this a paper that can be developed into a publishable manuscript? Most of what we learn, the basics of what we learn, how to construct a proper paper, you have already learned in high school, I hope.
I describe the difference between the two, between a blog and like a research paper, just having done both. Like a blog, at least as far as Craftsman Online, I think our criteria is we ask for something, if you're interested in submitting, to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 600 words. Because sadly, that's really where the average American attention span has gotten to.
That's right.
That's
right.
A couple paragraphs, maybe a page and a half, double spaced. So not a lot of knowledge, just an idea that you're kind of sharing there. Versus in grad school, I would have been lucky to have gotten an assignment at the beginning of the term saying the capstone will be a 20-page research paper with at least 12 cited. And I think the key thing, I took this note down, and Adam was, mentioning this in his use of the word, but peer reviewed. That is something that is so strong that comes in the research space, which leads me into the next question. So I know one brother that uses AI a lot to help generate not just the ideas, but sometimes some of the content for what he puts out. And another brother was like, oh, I go to this website where this guy's writing all of this, and I just kind of take what he says, and then I drop it into AI and have that. And I'm like, we're literally living in a time when a computer is telling you one thing, and as lazy humans, we're copying and pasting that into another AI program to just respin this. I'm sure you guys have been asked this question a million times. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you tonight. Where are you on the use of AI when it comes to research or as a tool in the process for researching?
Let me just say this, be your own brain. I have mixed feelings on it, but I do know that when, Wikipedia and all that stuff came out, everybody was freaked out. It's the end of knowledge as we know it. What you have to understand is that these are good starting off points in order to create your, I wouldn't even call it foundation, just your trail. But be your own brain, use your own smarts about it, use it as a resource, I suppose, but not to write your paper. If you do not understand the subject, fundamentally, you are susceptible to the wrong information. You do not understand, you may not understand the nuances of the subject. So that I offer that bit of caution.
I'm actually going to be even more harsh than Adam is, and I think you shouldn't submit any paper to any of the big three if you're utilizing AI. Number one, we will see it because we have tools that can put that information into a reference tool, an online reference tool that can tell us that you used AI. Number one. Number two, if you don't cite that, there are plagiarism, there are serious issues associated with that. Because AI scrapes from, as Adam says, current resources and other, there are plagiarism issues. There are ethical issues involved in using AI. Now, what I will say is the goal of a good research paper is that when someone reads your paper, and this is part of the peer review process that I love this part of the process, because what I'm seeing how you are trying to work through a problem. So a research paper is you trying to define that problem and then trying to answer that problem, or trying to figure out what that problem is, and then you're elaborating to the reader, to me, how you got to that point. And that's the best part about a research paper, because it's a mystery, it's a riddle, and you are using as many resources that you could find to help answer that riddle or perhaps craft the message. And also, I consider research papers pieces of art. The words, it's poetry, it's rhythm, it's rhyme. Adam is a fantastic, he writes well. He has beautiful prose. I will never get to the point where Adam writes. He writes so well. I write more of in a journalistic style.
That's where I can compliment you. He gets to the point.
Not when I'm speaking, clearly. But and by the way, I've already done this myself. I was really anxious about when the White House and the Freemasons went online, because we put an audiobook version of it. And so I went online and started going through ChatGPT, trying to see, give me a list of all the Masonic activities that happened to the President of the United States. I was glad to find inaccurate statements, wrong dates, wrong figures, wrong. And so I was like, okay, great. At least my book is still somewhat useful, because the information online is completely false when it comes to Freemasonry.
We've been talking about the disadvantages of AI. Ultimately, after all of the unethical activities and everything like that, ultimately you're robbing yourself. Do you want to be walk around and you can publish something that's totally AI generated, but knowing deep down you never did it. And again, I don't want to sound mean for those who have used it for certain things for their own benefit or anything like that. But as far as putting out a published paper, just please don't do it.
Hello, Craftsman Online podcast listeners. This is Brother Jason Short from the Craftsman Online Reading Room. Save the date, Tuesday, October 30th, when our reading room opens at 7 p.m. Eastern as we welcome our special guest, Brother Mark Stavish, author of The Path of Freemasonry. We will be discussing Chapter 8, Occult Masonry of the 18th Century. Get the reading materials, the link to join our YouTube live event, and email your questions for the panel discussion at craftsmanonline.com. That's craftsmanonline.com. See you on October 30th.
And I think the biggest thing that you're losing, and you guys are both touching on it, is what I would say is the most beautiful part of writing is when you actually, the writer has a voice and you're reading their work and you get it. Like for me, the example I give is Malcolm Gladwell. Years before he had his podcast, or was like a popular guest on television shows, he was writing these wonderful books, and just the way that he wrote them, I was like, well, this is a very interesting way he puts the words together. And then when I would hear him talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's narrating his own books. I can now hear his voice in everything I read from him moving past. So I think you guys have definitely touched on a big thing that every writer should know before they get started. I think this is an exciting also moment for our Blue Lodges, is that this is the first time I can recall in recent history where brothers are looking forward to saying, hey, I have something I want to say in lodge. Either they want to write a paper or they want to put some sort of PowerPoint presentation or program together. So we've talked about what to avoid. I'd like to get your insight on what new researchers or brothers who want to dive into a topic and do a presentation for lodge, what should they be doing?
You know, I was one of these guys that was really interested in esoteric topics when I came into Masonry. Became a Master Mason, and then really my focus shifted on history because I realized the history stuff has not yet been cultivated. There's still all these stories and all these different things that haven't been written yet. And I think, Michael, we may have alluded to this in the last podcast of like, every state has all these stories. You know, Adam came up created this great biography on a past Grand Master of California that hasn't been written until Adam worked on it and, you know, created this large biography on this guy. It's been 200 plus years, and you're telling me Adam is the first one to do it? Find a topic that you're interested in, or take a look at what's being currently published and written about on contemporary Masonry. If you find something that you're interested in, dive into the material and see what's been published before. See who's published it. Sometimes there's authors like me who have a narrow focus on a certain interest or subject. And so dive in and see what's been written, and then take what's been written and write it out and do it in a way where you're trying to explain it to your friend, or, you know, do it in a story. Write it in a way you can communicate to a friend about a story, and then that will help you craft your message. There's a different part of your brain that you utilize to communicate a story to someone versus writing it down with someone.
I want to jump off of that. And when you're looking at resources or looking for resources, the best thing to do is look at a book, what they've written, what's been written before, combined indices, but also the references and footnotes. That's what they're for. Often, if you can find it, many authors or many historians will seek out primary sources. Secondary sources are good. You need them. But the primary source is the gold, because often if you have that, you can see where what others may have missed. Often new histories are created by finding what others have done and then pushing them together, seeing where they fit, examining who said what, and then moving on to your own idea. And that's exactly what I did with Chris referenced with this biography I did. What's even better is to find a little kernel that a historian has left off and, you know, said, hey, you know, I didn't get to this in my study. This is something for a future historian. I love finding those. That's a gift to you. Seek those out. Now more than ever, there's an avenue finally for people like us to do Masonic history. You see it a lot. There's symposia, there's presentations abound. We're on the result of this, a podcast, because there is a wide audience for it.
That's going to do things for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, make sure you follow the Craftsman Online podcast on Spotify or subscribe on Apple Podcasts to get new episodes every Monday morning. As we mentioned, this is the first of a two-part series. Part 2 will be dropping on Wednesday this week. If you are a Craftsman Online Patreon subscriber, the bonus episode's all for you. But hey, there's still time for you to get that free 7-day trial. Get the link in the show notes for this episode. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.